Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Aaron Budris. I'm a senior regional planner here at NVCOG. I'm joined by Christine O'Neill, who is a regional environmental planner. And we're going to talk this morning about the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP's, new Climate Resilient Fund grant program. I think it's a really great opportunity to fund actions that the towns are usually on the hook for. And it's could be a key to unlock the abundance of federal funding that's going to be available through the bipartisan infrastructure law and other federal programs over the next few years. I'm going to pass it over to Christine in a minute to discuss some of the general information about the program and the assistance that NVCOG can provide for municipal applications. And then I'm going to talk about the potential for a regional submission. Our presentation shouldn't take too long, so we're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end. In the meantime, please keep yourself muted. If you have a question during the presentation or you need clarification, you can type into the chat box. We'll keep an eye on that, or you can raise your hand, and we'll try to monitor that as well. So with that, Christine, do you want to start your presentation?
Sure. So first I want to ask, can everyone see my screen right now? Like a thumbs up would be awesome. Seeing some nods. Okay, awesome. Fabulous. Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much everyone for joining us. Thanks, Aaron, for the introduction. Let's dive right in. So this Climate Resilience Fund is being offered by the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Management, or DEEP. The grant program has 2 tracks and they each have a different due date. So we'll go into detail shortly about what each track means, but we have track 1 due on November 10th and track 2 due on December 1st. So the upshot of this program is, okay, just sorry about that. So the upshot of this program is basically to develop a project pipeline, as Aaron said, to access all the federal infrastructure money out there. So this means that this grant program is not for construction or implementation. It's to plan for projects and to design and develop those projects. But this is exciting because, as Aaron pointed out to me, it's probably the first time ever that you're being paid to write a grant application. So this is a very exciting opportunity. So what sort of projects are they looking for? You'll hear us talk a lot about climate resilience in terms of flooding, just because that's the most prominent climate hazard in our region. But any climate hazards you can think of would really be eligible. So this could include resilience against droughts, wildfires, winter storms, sea level rise, really any of those extreme weather events. And when they talk about resilience, they give a few examples. Generally speaking, they'll fund nature-based solutions like green infrastructure, flood prevention, climate resilience, and erosion control systems, and gray infrastructure. So that's a pretty wide gamut of different types of projects they'll fund. And the reason that we as NVCOG are here to speak to you today is we sort of see ourselves having 2 roles here. The first role would be to basically support you as you apply for your own grants. So we could do a little bit of possibly GIS mapping for you. We can certainly write a support letter for you and answer questions you have to help you understand the grant itself. And then second, we are looking into, which Aaron is going to discuss shortly, developing a regional application that aggregates a few small culvert or drainage related projects. So let's talk about track 1. So track 1, as we mentioned, it's due relatively soon. It's due in about 3 weeks. This is for planning. And what they mean by planning would be on the regional, municipal, or neighborhood scale. So not for a particular project, but something like a municipal resilience plan, something like inventorying and assessing all the culverts in your community. This is large scale, high level planning. There is no match required for either track, actually, which makes this a very attractive program. And community engagement would be a big part of this. This is particularly if you do not have priority projects already identified in existing plans. So we can go into more detail about that if you have questions, but again, this is very general, high level sort of planning. So track 2 is for projects that have already been identified in an existing plan. As you can see, the funding range is quite a bit larger than the other one, and there's a wider variety of things that they will fund. So any sort of studies, an engineering study, a cost benefit study, a feasibility study. They'll also fund preliminary designs, which is the big deal. And as we mentioned earlier, they will basically pay you to write a federal grant application, which is or hire a consultant to do so, which is very exciting. One of the sort of catches here is that you need to be able to identify a federal grant program that can pay for the implementation and construction of this. DEEP can help you with that. We can help you with that. It's not a huge barrier because there's tons of programs out there, but just something to keep in mind. This also has a robust community engagement portion to it. A bit of a shorter timeline here, but I think that's because they want you to be able to access these funds, these federal funds, while they're still ripe for the picking. And again, we can answer more questions about that later. Very quickly, there are a few funding priorities that you should be aware of. So DEEP has identified that 40% of these funds will go to vulnerable communities. They have a whole page in their NOFO about what is a vulnerable community or population. Very high level, we can say that Ansonia, Derby, and Waterbury are environmental justice communities and would go towards that 40%. However, in their narrative, they explain that there may be vulnerable populations that could count towards this. For instance, if you are looking to resize culverts in a senior living community, that aging population could be considered a vulnerable. So again, it's a little sticky, but we can talk about that. Nature-based solutions incorporate elements of nature to mitigate climate change effects. These would be your sort of typical low impact development, a vegetated bioswale, a rain garden, a riparian buffer to reduce flooding, a green roof to be able to absorb some of that stormwater. So these, they're prioritizing having some nature-based solutions incorporated into the grant program, but don't feel like if you have something that's purely great infrastructure, it will be ignored. This is just something they've identified. And finally, as we've mentioned, they're really focused on community engagement. They have some minimum requirements for public meetings, but a good chunk of the grant application is going to focus on what your community engagement plan is. And finally, before I turn it over to Aaron, I just want to very quickly go over the applications. I'm going to pop this little link in the chat, but this is the homepage for, there's a ton of resources on this, but this is the homepage for the program, and it is where you will get the grant applications. A quick note is that there's separate grant applications for each track, as we mentioned, so just make sure you're using the right one. It's not a super intimidating grant application, in my opinion. There are 30 questions, but some of them are like, you know, simple, short, like 1 or 2 word answers. But you know, the lion's share are like several paragraphs would be, you know, sufficient to respond. There's no page limit. So if you want to include a, you know, cute picture of you guys at a community event, handing out a flyer or something, that's welcome. And the required attachments, again, not too intimidating, I think. They provide templates for your milestone chart and your budget. And NVCOG can, of course, provide a letter of support and mapping capabilities, as long as you let us know ahead of time. With that, I will turn it over to Aaron.
Thanks, Christine. So, you know, I think when this program was announced, I was really intrigued by track 2 of the program. You know, between the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, there's nearly $50 billion to implement climate resilience projects over the next few years. And for instance, FEMA's BRIC program increased from $500 million in 2020 to $2.3 billion in 2022. NOAA funded programs have increased nearly 400% in the past couple of years. So there's a lot of money out there, and I think you all probably want to get your hands on some of it. And you already have a lot of resilience projects identified. So we just completed an update of the natural hazard mitigation plans. So all 19 of your towns have projects that are identified in that. This is really an unprecedented opportunity to advance those projects and to make strong applications for some of the federal funds. So we've also assisted in several other planning efforts that identify potential projects. So there have been watershed-based plans completed in many watersheds across the region. So most recently, the Pequabic River, the Mill River, and the Pomperog River. And those all identified drainage projects that, while I think they were really intended more to address water quality, those projects could also mitigate flooding in many circumstances. We also have seen a lot of road stream crossing inventories completed over the past few years, and there's a few ongoing right now. Those were mainly done by Naugatuck+Valley Association and Save the Sound. So Oxford, Watertown, Seymour, and Naugatuck all have completed plans. I don't know if they've been approved locally or not yet, but there are projects listed in those, or at least the identification of undersized culverts that are prone to flooding. There's also projects ongoing right now in Thomaston and Prospect. And Pomperog River Watershed Coalition's also been doing some similar work, I think, in Woodbury. So you all have identified projects already, but a lot of those projects are really little more than an identification of a problem flooding area or an undersized culvert, and they really don't have the information readily available to complete a full federal application for funding. So this could be your opportunity to do that work and get that information and make a really competitive application. So in the past few weeks, COG staff has looked through all of these plans that we're aware of, and we started pulling out projects that sort of fit this program, and we focus mainly on drainage and flooding related capital improvement projects, again because that is the largest hazard that was identified in the hazard mitigation plans. And we sent all of those projects that we pulled out to the towns. And again, that wasn't a comprehensive list. There are probably more plans and more projects out there that your towns have identified, but I think it was a good start. You can go to the next slide, Christine. So we think, this could be an opportunity for a regional approach to save the town's money and effort and address some of this need. So there's a lot of similar projects that are, sort of culvert replacement projects or drainage improvements to address flooding issues. And we think it makes a lot of sense to, instead of individual towns going out and applying for federal funds for these or to apply to this program, it might make sense to package a bunch of similar projects together and submit one application. So what that would look like, so again, to be competitive in this program, I think we would have to ensure that, at least 40% of those projects or the money for those projects would go to vulnerable or EJ communities. But we could package, however many we can fit in the funding limits, and then NVCOG would develop and issue a solicitation for services, contract with DEEP and a consultant or several consultants to do this work, and we would handle all the contracting, and then oversee and coordinate with a consultant or several consultants, depending on how many projects we have to oversee. But the consultant would really work directly with the towns to advance projects and prepare funding applications. And we sort of envision the deliverables to be preliminary plans and any study that needs to be done to develop those. So, if there has to be a hydraulic analysis or whatever, and then design and construction cost estimates, public outreach and engagement would all be, handled during this. I think most of the federal programs now really want to see that public engagement. and to ensure that your community is behind these projects. And then the consultant and NVCOG would also identify the funding source for implementation, and then draft an application to request funding for that funding source. Next slide. So when we sent the list of potential projects out to all of you, we also asked for towns that might be interested in joining a regional application. And we've had a little bit of interest so far, and I'm listing these not to put anyone on the spot or call anybody out, but just to sort of give you an idea of what we're thinking. So these three projects in Beacon Falls, Middlebury, and Oxford, I think are really exactly sort of right in the wheelhouse of what we're thinking of. So in Beacon Falls, upgrade drainage system on Main Street to prevent drainage from backing up through the system when Naugatuck River is high. In Middlebury, increase the conveyance capacities of culverts at the intersection of Cemetery Road and Middlebury Road. And in Oxford, to replace a drainage pipe on the north side of the Oxford Center Firehouse to mitigate flooding. Woodbury is interested in a project to install signage and possibly gates to prevent people from driving into flooded roadways. This is sort of outside of what we're thinking, but we're still trying to fit it in somehow, and evaluating how we could maybe incorporate it. But all of these projects were identified in the natural hazard mitigation plans. And I think this is sort of where we can really advance these, so sort of flesh these out, get all of the information that we need to request federal funds for the towns and make that happen. So we have asked that any towns interested in in joining a regional application submit at least interest, or email us and tell us you're interested by Friday, this Friday. So we really don't need any more information than that at this point. Just let us know you're interested, and we can work with you to identify the project or get more information. Next slide, please, Christine. So again, what we need from you, if you're interested in this regional approach, is interest by Friday, and then we'll work with you to get additional information. But we're probably going to need more project information, like what you've already done, maybe a better description of how flooding has impacted the town or the community. We're eventually going to need a support letter that commits to staff time and to match for the eventual implementation. So even though there's no match requirement for the DEEP program, there are match requirements for most of the federal programs that you would eventually be seeking implementation funding for. So for instance, BRIC, FEMA's BRIC program, it's usually a 25% local, 75% federal. Depending on your town, some underserved communities might be 10% local, 90% federal. It really all depends, but we can help identify that, and it just needs to be, discussed in your support letter that, when we do eventually go for federal funds, that you do have the match and are committed to that. And we might just need some more assistance with the application. So, we might want more information about how we're going to engage your community, and whatever else might come up as we put together the application. And again, it's sort of a quick turnaround. We need to, I think it's December 2nd is the deadline, or December 1st. So, what we have a month basically to put this together. So, having a staff person readily available to us that we can, reach and have questions answered would be very helpful. Next slide. And so that's really it for our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions or discuss this further. And I will open it up to anybody who wants to unmute and ask us questions.
Morning, guys. How you doing? I guess just so there's not complete silence. This is Ray Rogosinski from city of Bristol. Bristol is interested. It's probably best if I talk to you just offline with respect to what our projects would be. I do apologize. I probably missed the first 10 minutes when you were talking. I was taken away by some issues in Bristol. And but could this funding be used for property acquisition?
I don't think so. I think that would be part of, I think several of the federal funding sources could be used for property acquisition. And I think, this would really just identify the property, possibly do the, assessment or, whatever needs to be done to get that ready to be purchased. So that, when you do apply for, say it's brick to acquire a flood, a property that's flooded very often, you would have all that information in hand.
Could this funding be used for a study?
Yes.
Okay.
I see that Danielle had posted a question in the chat that I'd like to address. Can you clarify the community engagement? I want to clarify that the meetings do not need to be held prior to the application submission, just laying out the community engagement in the app. Yes, you're absolutely correct, Danielle. There's no community engagement that needs to happen before you submit the application. I think, and I apologize if it wasn't sort of clear from the way I discussed it in the slides, but for track 1, you are required through the implementation of the grant to hold at least 3 public meetings. And in in track 2, you're required to hold at least 2 public meetings. However, there is a good chunk of the grant application that is about your community engagement plan. So even though you don't need to do that community engagement, you need to have a plan for it. One of the things that is an eligible expense is hiring a community liaison. If you're not familiar with this, it's the idea of hiring a local person in the community to basically sort of bring in people to these meetings to get them to give their feedback. This is an eligible expense. So they basically just want you to have some sort of robust community engagement plan while you implement that grant. I hope that has answered your question.
Mark Presidento, Town of Woolcott. I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
When you sent the email to our town, you listed 4 of the projects from our hazardous mitigation plan. Not to sound greedy, but how many of these can we go for?
Well, I don't think there's a limit necessarily. I don't know. I'm not sure I think a town can submit more than one municipal application, or I think you could probably package several projects into one municipal application. I think for our purposes, depending on how much interest we get, we might be able to do, 1 or maybe 2. But let's talk about it offline and we can figure out what you're thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, and
thank you.
Maybe what would also be helpful is if you could put them in order for us, prioritize, so that if we do have more room in the application, we could take number 1 and number 2, and if not, just maybe number 1.
And this is Bristol. I have another question. So we have honestly probably a half dozen culverts that we're currently proceeding with in various stages, either design just about or complete or pending a state approval for the state local bridge program because they qualify on that. Could this money be used to supplant a city share of state local bridge funds?
No. And I think, if you already have that much work done, I think, this is not the right program. This is really meant for projects where you sort of have a really conceptual idea of what you want to do. And, this is going to, do all the legwork to flesh that idea out a bit. So no,
Okay.
it can't be used for match.
I will say, I don't know if this is sort of like adjacent to what you're asking, Ray, but if you have something identified, so, you know, we mentioned we looked in like the watershed-based plans, natural hazard mitigation plans. They also said if you have something identified in a capital improvement plan, that counts as prior planning. So if you have something identified in the CIP, but you haven't started implementing it yet, that would be eligible.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Just to quickly expand on what Christine was saying, I think even if it's mentioned as an area of concern in a plan of conservation and development as well, that may or may not overlap with your capital improvement plan, but you know, even that kind of overview preliminary planning would be you know, leading you towards a project's eligibility.
Right. And, you know, sort of to piggyback on that, I think, you know, there's specific actions laid out in hazard mitigation plans. And those are all certainly, you know, that's where we looked basically, but there's also a lot of discussion in the narrative in the hazard mitigation plan about problem flooding areas that, you know, we could certainly, you know, make an argument that those should also be included. So, you know, if you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive on your hazard mitigation plan, you could probably find projects like that as well.
I'm curious, is anybody interested in applying for their own application for track 1? I think we have a lot of stuff identified in natural hazard mitigation plans and such, but track 1 is kind of an exciting opportunity too, because it is broader. It can be community wide, and it could look at something like grid resilience or road stream crossings. Just curious if anyone.
So from Bristol's perspective, we'll send you an email expressing our interest. We'll indicate our problem statement, and then what we would be looking, you know, to pursue, and then maybe some guidance from NVCOG, whether go on our own or include it as part as yours.
Sure. One thing I definitely want to mention is that, and should probably pop a link in here, but so on that link I posted at the top there, there's tons of information. DEEP has held a bunch of webinars already and is actually going to have office hours tomorrow about this grant program. So I'm going to put the link in there. They can go into much more depth than we can about this. Obviously not about our regional app, but in general. And so if anyone wants to sign up for the office hours tomorrow, the link is in the chat.
And we're, you know, this idea, the concept that we have is not really set in stone right now. So, you know, we want to hear from you about, you know, if there's a way you think we could better serve the communities, you know, let us know. And, you know, we're here to help you. So, you know, please don't hesitate to reach out. If that's it, I know we had this scheduled for an hour. I was thinking it probably wasn't going to go an hour, but we can give you all an extra half hour in your morning. So we appreciate it. And again, don't hesitate to reach out to me or Christine. And I hope to hear from you all soon. Have a good day.
No one has ever complained about a meeting being too short.
No.
So I think we're good. Thank you. Take care.
Have a good day, everyone.